Thank you all for standing by, and welcome to today's webinar, Dynamic Service Networking with F5 and HashiCorp. My name is Karen Hui, Senior Partner Marketing Manager at HashiCorp, and I'll be helping to facilitate today's webinar. Please feel free to type your questions during the webinar in the Q&A section below. This webinar is recorded, and the recording will be made available after post-processing, usually within a few days. Our speakers today are Peter McCarron, Senior Product Marketing Manager, HashiCorp, and Eric Chen, Senior Solutions Architect, Cloud DevOps, F5. They'll be talking about network infrastructure automation, NIA, and how HashiCorp's Consul-Terraform-Sync and F5 big IP solutions can help avoid disappointing shortfalls in application pipeline automation. Please feel free to reach out directly to the speakers for any follow-up questions as well. And now let's get started. Peter, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Very excited to be joining everybody today. Awesome. Really excited to be presenting with Eric. Eric is a great presenter, so I always get a joy to be on the other end watching as well. As Karen mentioned, my name is Peter McCarron. I'm the Senior Product Marketing Manager on the Consul team. Just to give you a quick overview, kind of agenda-wise, I'm going to cover a little bit about network infrastructure automation, just talking about what the solution is, how we're trying to address it. We're going to dive a little bit into what Consul-Terraform-Sync is, at which point I'm going to turn it over to Eric, and Eric's going to go through how we're leveraging the integrations between Consul-Terraform-Sync and F5 to really get you a great automated solution for your networking needs. So, like I said, before we really dive into the solution itself, let's kind of set the stage. So, what is the current challenges that we saw from our customers that we were like, hey, we gotta solve this? A lot of it started with this idea that the networks are running into this pressure from development teams where they're saying your ticketing processes are not moving as fast as we need you to. In order for us to be very agile in the cloud, when we're really trying to implement a CI/CD solution, we can't rely on network tickets that are going to take us 3 to 5 days. We need something that moves a little bit faster, and those processes are becoming a bottleneck for us. That's also leading to increased costs because I really can't optimize for the number of services that I'm going to be running. As part of the demo that Eric's going to show later, he's going to show we can really do this great application scaling piece that's going to help improve the efficiency of your infrastructure. So rather than just creating a new environment or buying something new to be able to load new applications, you're going to be able to optimize your existing infrastructure and manage larger and larger scales of services. The other problem is that as we start to move up in terms of these number of services, we run into this increased risk. If I'm doing everything manually, if I'm doing these manual configurations, there's a larger chance that I'm going to misconfigure something. And as these things are all interdependent with each other, if I misconfigure one thing, then I could have result in a massive outage across the entire network, which is not going to make anybody happy, networking or development. And so to really kind of paint this picture, what we want to say is like, why is this process taking so long? Why is this bottleneck being created? And it's really because the scaling process actually takes a lot of time. If you look at it from a developer standpoint, a developer says, okay, I want to scale up my application, and I open up a ticket for my server admin, and I ask them to deploy my new workload. But the work doesn't stop there. What ends up happening is that the server admin is going to work with the network team to make sure that new IP addresses have been assigned, to make sure that the load balancers have been updated properly, to make sure that our workloads are healthy, to make sure we have the right ACL rules in place, updating our switches, make sure we're applying firewall policies, adding it to the NAT gateway. Like there's a number of different things that are going to happen. And if at any point in these steps, I don't have the specific piece that I need added to the ticket, I have to file a new ticket. And so this creates this really, really large headache for development teams that want to move very quickly. So us at HashiCorp and with our partners over at F5, we said, how can we address this? What's the way that we can help improve this process for folks? And that's automation. But where does the challenge of automation come in is that if you are trying to do this, you understand like automation tools are great, but it may not necessarily work for your current team. So when we talk to different customers, we found that 48% said that there's a skill gap. Folks haven't used these automation tools before, so it gets a little bit tougher to teach a new process. They may be used to working with tools in a very certain way. There's also a concern about the integration with the tools and the vendors that they're using. Introducing an automation tool is great, but if it doesn't work with the technology that I have, it's not going to be very helpful. And then also from an operational model standpoint, we're handling a number of other things. We're hitting our SLAs. We're making sure that the network is secure. We don't have the operation model in place to adopt automation. And that becomes a little bit more challenging because if you think about it from a people and process standpoint, you're a finite number of resources. So unless you hire more heads who are going to handle this, it can become problematic. And so when we look at like how do we solve these challenges, the idea is like we're not going to revamp the entire network. What we're going to do is we're going to isolate specific key processes that we know we can use our tools to integrate together with and be able to create automation. And as a result, that's where we have this concept that we call network infrastructure automation. So when you hear us talk about NIA and you hear us talk about Consul-Terraform-Sync, understand that Consul-Terraform-Sync is a tool that helps you achieve network infrastructure automation. Sometimes they're used a little bit interchangeably, but we like to let people know there are actually multiple ways that you can achieve it. And I'm going to cover a couple of them, and Eric's going to talk about a few more that we are go into a little bit more detail on how they work. So to give you the high-level view, what is network infrastructure automation? There's really kind of two components that we want to make sure we're breaking down. There's the initial provisioning process, or what we call the day 0 or day 1 problem, and then there's the day 2+ problem. So from a day 0 and a day 1 piece where I'm just trying to build infrastructure, deploy it very quickly in a repeatable way, I can use Terraform for that. Terraform is a provider for many different solutions. Our ecosystem is growing every day. We have more and more resources that we support. We have very tight integrations with like the F5 big IP provider, which allows you to be able to automate the process for redeploying new infrastructure or provisioning it from scratch. And then kind of channeling my inner Pedro Pascal here, automation is good, but it could be better, right? So what do I do in day 2+? How do I make sure that not only do I help people be able to provision environments very quickly, but how do I have those ongoing operations take care of themselves so that I'm not just shifting the problem to where an operator is doing it via the CLI, but now is doing it via Terraform instead? How do I remove them from that equation to allow a more self-service approach so that my developers are able to actually consume this rather than just having to wait on tickets being done in a different way? So we have Consul-Terraform-Sync, which I'm going to talk about the details on, and then we have our native integrations with things like Big IP. So Terraform we covered. Again, this is really from that provisioning standpoint. We want to create a single centralized workflow for managing our infrastructure. It's very familiar for folks who've done infrastructure as code. A lot of companies and a lot of our customers are saying, we're doing this with cloud infrastructure. How do we apply this to additional solutions? And the Terraform ecosystem is growing rapidly. Every day we have hundreds of providers, both official and community-driven ones. And pretty much if there's an API out there, you can write a Terraform provider for it. From the native integration standpoint, we work with F5 using their solution of AS3. Basically what this is doing is kind of setting the stage of what we're going to talk about with Consul-Terraform-Sync. I can provision this all using Terraform, like I said, from a day 0 perspective, and then I can use the AS3 integration to essentially have Consul become the source of truth that AS3 uses to make updates to Big IP. So what happens is that whenever a developer or a server team deploys a new workload into an environment, it registers with Consul. Consul updates its catalog and then pushes those changes to AS3 to be able to apply them on the back end. This is really great for things like member pool updates. So if I just need to make sure that whenever I add a new service to my environment, it needs to get added to the member pool, this is a really, really good way to do it without having to learn a lot of new different integration pieces. But again, we're trying to solve for that, like how do we make it even better? How do we really get that true driverless car that I'm able to just set it and forget it so I can handle other things, like maybe playing Sudoku while I'm on the way to my destination? And that's Consul-Terraform-Sync. So essentially what we decided to do is we're going to build a tool that sits alongside Consul that installs Terraform into an environment and then uses the Terraform providers to be able to execute changes that you as an operator are able to define. This is really that true automation story from a day 2+, where essentially I define the tasks that I want to have happen, and then I use Terraform to execute them, and it's all based on Consul being that central catalog for knowing where all my applications are residing. So let's talk a little bit about how that works. Diving into the details. So from a detail perspective, Consul-Terraform-Sync, like I said, it's a second binary that you install alongside Consul. But what this really does is that it's built on this network driver. The network driver is where we're not only installing Terraform, but we're doing things like defining the backend. We offer backend support for the state file with Consul itself. There's a number of cloud providers or local storage options that we also offer. And this is also where I'm going to define the different providers that I'm going to need. So in this case, what I'm going to do here is that when I install Consul-Terraform-Sync, it's going to not only install Consul, define where the state file is going to be residing. It's also going to download the providers I need and then store them in a very quick variable that I can use in my task definitions, which I'll show here in a second. So in this code block, what you're seeing is we have the driver being initiated. We have the backend being defined as Consul, and we're saying that we need the big IP provider, which we're downloading from the Terraform registry. I then use that in what we call tasks. So tasks are basically creating a snippet to say, Terraform, I need you to execute this when these changes happen. The best way to kind of describe it is let's walk through what this code block is saying. What I have here is I have an AS3 definition, and basically what I need to do is I need to create an AS3 application. There's a predefined module that already exists in the Terraform registry, thanks to our friends at F5 for actually writing that, that I'm going to pull directly from the registry and execute when something happens. I'm going to use the big IP provider that we defined on the last block, and then I have my services. So if I have S1 and S2, what I'm going to actually do is that anytime there are changes made to those, so if I scale them up or I scale them down, or I add maybe an additional one, what I'm going to have it do is I'm going to ask it to execute this task, and it's going to use that TFRs file to authenticate. So in this circumstance, maybe it's updating that member pool or it's making a change to AS3. What I'm going to do is that whenever something happens in the environment that Consul detects a change of, it's going to ask Consul-Terraform-Sync to execute this on its behalf. So that's that real automation process. This is where I can define things for operators so that they don't manually have to do it. It becomes very self-service, very API-driven. So then the question becomes like, okay, well, I can do that. That sounds great. But how do I know that it's working successfully? How do I have visibility into what's actually happening when these tasks are executing? And as part of the GA launch, what we did is we introduced this concept of statuses. So task A or task B, we can actually get those log outputs of what happened, and I can check on them and see if they're actually running successfully. So if you look at the code block here, what we're seeing is that task A ran successfully. It used the provider that I had defined previously. It worked for service API, and then it gives me an events URL so I can go see the actual execution of it and see what happened in all the log changes that are being stored in Consul. For task B, I can see, hey, this errored. And now I know that if something's not working properly, I know exactly which task I need to go check on to make sure that I've updated it. Most likely what it looks like happened here is that the provider wasn't defined. It's saying null. So that means that I probably have to go back into my task definition and make sure that that provider has been added. Then there's the question of security, right? I'm trusting this car to get me to my destination. I want to make sure it does so in a safe manner. So how do I do that? I don't want to hard code any of my credentials in there. Well, HashiCorp, we have a great tool for that, and it's called Vault. Vault has a integration with Terraform, and essentially what we can do is we can use Vault's KV secrets engine to pull dynamic credentials rather than hard coding them into like a TF variable file. So what I can do is I can ask Terraform that when it needs to be able to execute a change, go check with Vault to get some new credentials, and it's going to create dynamic ones that I can have a predefined time to live on. So this is a much better way of being able to do it as opposed to like having to worry about people hard coding information in there. I can use these tools together. And so now when you think about the power of this, we're using F5 together with Terraform, Consul, and Vault. And this is a really, really holistic automated solution that's going to really help remove some of the elements of operators needing just to fill tickets. The other piece is that, you may have questions about the segmentation. I was talking with some folks recently about this where they said, well, this is great. I like the idea of this, but how do I make sure that wherever information is being communicated, that maybe I'm not applying changes everywhere? Consul Enterprise offers this feature that we call namespaces. Namespaces allows you to be able to segment out different environments that Consul recognizes, and then we can apply those changes to. So for Consul, I could have a development environment defined, a test environment defined, and a production environment defined. And then what I can do is I can tag those services to say which one it belongs to. So if I have multiple tasks that are running, Consul-Terraform-Sync can actually infer those namespaces and say, okay, well, this is the test environment, so I should only make the changes to any of the equipment or execute these tasks to the environment that's labeled as test. I don't need to touch the production environment, because that's not what has been defined here. So this gives me a lot more granular control as I start to scale it up and I try to run it across multiple different devices. It becomes really, really powerful for me. And so if you remember that one slide that we had that really showed that scaling process and all the different things that are happening, look at how we're able to simplify this. Like I said, automation is good. It can be better. We've made it better. Essentially what I do is if I'm a developer, I talk to my server admin and they say, okay, well, we're going to create some new infrastructure using Terraform. We're going to register those services with Consul and AS3. Anytime we make those changes, Consul is going to be aware of them and it's going to inform AS3 of those changes. And then AS3 is going to make the updates to Big IP. So now we've really fully removed the human element of this and really give people the standpoint of, okay, I have this automated process. This is going to take me a matter of days. Recently in a different webinar that we had on this, they talked about how using this type of solution, they were able to remove themselves from the process of doing something, let developers hit a self-service API, and the process that used to take 3 to 5 days now is taking about 2 minutes. So this is really, really cool stuff. And to get a little bit deeper into it, I'm going to hand it over to Eric, who's going to walk us through the F5 components of this. So Eric, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Peter. And that story you were telling about kind of enabling developers to go through a self-service portal, enter in a minimal piece of information, and then the outcome is deploying the infrastructure is what I'll be talking about next. So we've heard from Peter from the HashiCorp perspective, kind of these different building blocks. We've heard about Terraform and handling kind of day zero. We've talked about Consul and Consul-Terraform-Sync about handling day 2+, but I wanted to kind of orient you to kind of F5's approach to automation and how we're working with our partners like HashiCorp and others to kind of enable network infrastructure as code. So to start, I just want to orient folks with the way that we think about these day 0, day 2 type of changes when you think about a network device, because you know, we have folks that may be coming from the application side, people who may be coming from the network side. But if you think about the lifecycle of a network device, you know, back in the day, it used to be you'd physically rack a system, and that would be kind of what we would refer to as the bootstrap process of just kind of getting it up. You might need to enter in some basic networking information. That's what we refer to as the onboarding process, where you have to give it an IP address, you know, set the network, and then we get into kind of the things that developers care about, which is deploying the kind of your application. That means you have to have an IP address, support, you have to know where the backend applications are. There's a lot of metadata that you have to know about. And that's really where we want to kind of focus this conversation on. Obviously, we can also talk about telemetry and other things, but we're going to be kind of focused on these areas today. So with respect to these kind of different pillars, day 0, day 2 type of changes, what you'll be seeing in a demonstration shortly is how we've kind of helped enable these type of self-service portals through the use of application services extension, which Peter's introduced. But I would also like to add in a new technology that is the F5 application service templates. So if we rewind to kind of, you know, what is the problem that we're trying to solve, is we want to reduce the cognitive load that a developer needs to get their job done. So a developer doesn't care about what VLAN an application is on. They don't care what a TCP profile is. There's a lot of information that a developer doesn't care about that a network administrator does care about. So what I'll be talking about is ways that we can create policies for the network for security. Maybe your security team wants to kind of set a certain type of SSL profile. and how we can kind of templatize that and then deliver it through using templates. So the outcome being is that when we talk about how do we create a process where an application developer can create a self-service ticket and it only takes 2 or 3 minutes to turn around, but still preserve the rich intelligence and security that our big IP devices can provide. So to do that, I'm going to introduce kind of 2 areas of topics. And the first one I want to talk about is just kind of how we change in terms of moving into a self-service type of model. So if we think about a traditional network change, it would mean that we would create a ticket. The ticket would sit in the queue, and then someone would have to go out to make that change. What we've introduced with Application Services Extension is a new API format to enable self-service. And the first part of that is what we refer to as event-driven service discovery. And this is solving kind of an age-old problem that many network and app teams have, which is how do you add and remove a pool member from a big IP device? And the way that we do this is we can create a self-service API that the application owner, your self-service portal, all you need to do is just provide that basic information of what is that IP and port. We take that information and we can send that to a big IP device through kind of a designated API endpoint. And this can work for any set of clients. So what you'll see in the demonstration later on is this is how we enable Consul-Terraform-Sync to make these near real-time changes to the big IP. We're not waiting for kind of once a minute, every 2 minutes. We're talking about day 2+, where day 2 could be day 2.72, right? So how do we make that change right on that point? Is we enable the infrastructure to make that a change as it's occurring and not having to occur on a certain clock cycle. So that's the first part of this, of enabling the solution, is how do we first enable our partners to be able to make changes on a big IP device in near real time. The second part of it is how do we make this easier for our developers, for our application owners? If you think about all the capability that a big IP device has, there's a lot there, right? Different nerd knobs is kind of terms that my colleagues use, that you can kind of tune settings to get the best performance and security out of your network. And this is great for people who know our devices, but this can be overwhelming for application owners. So what you're seeing on screen is an example of how we can templatize the network and security settings of your infrastructure and create a policy. And this is great because this is kind of moving us into infrastructure as code, where we're no longer talking about, issue this command line command or, go into this GUI to make a change. But we can present this as a piece of code. In this case, it's a JSON document. And this represents how the application is going to be deployed. So this is good, but it's a little bit verbose. And, honestly, JSON is better than XML, than better than YAML. I don't know. Maybe that's kind of a bit of a debate, but we can do better than this. And this is where we've worked towards providing a way that we can build a template of these inputs. So conceptually think about this as the idea of take all of these kind of network changes that you need to make in your environment and just distill it down to what are the knobs that your application owners need to change. So maybe they need to know what environment it needs to go into. They may have a sense of what IP address that it needs to go into, but other than that, you really don't need to ask them any more information. And what this enables you to do is you could expose this directly to your end user or your operations team and kind of reduce kind of the issues with kind of making repeated changes. Or in the case of what you'll see in the demonstration, we can make it easier for our partners like HashiCorp to be able to leverage our platform by allowing the subject matter experts to kind of help build that kind of insightful policy that has the performance and security that the application team needs, but provide just enough information that a operations or automation or application team can make use of this without having to understand everything in here. So what you're seeing on this screen is we've taken kind of the GUI version of that template, And we've kind of also brought that down into where we can now invoke this from the big IP provider that we have for Terraform. So this sets the stage for kind of the environment that we're going to be demonstrating in a minute. Now, Len, I know we are approaching a holiday weekend, but I did want to kind of check in with our audience today and just see where we are. So you've heard a lot of information from Peter and myself. So I'll just kind of give you a moment to kind of check in, see if you've been paying attention, and before we kind of get into the demo. And if you have questions, please keep them coming in as well. Thank you. While we're waiting for the poll answers, Peter, how's it going? Do you have any big travel plans for the holiday?
Actually going to do a little bit of camping, so that should be a lot of fun. The weather's finally getting nice. How about yourself?
That sounds going to be taking a road trip, which I haven't done in a while, so that should be very good. Just kind of going up to see the folks. So, although I have to admit, my car is not self-driving, so I don't know if that kind of docks points to me because I don't have that self-driving car. So maybe
it's just like automation. We can make it a little bit better.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's kind of the next phase that F5 and HashiCorp can collaborate on is, network automation, that's like old, but like vacation automation, now that's a market that we could really get into.
There we go.
So we'll have to start working on it. All right. I think I've bought sufficient time for our guests to complete the poll, so I'll kind of now proceed and we can kind of now see, drum roll please, have our participants been paying attention. So good news is that everyone knows that network infrastructure automation does not involve kind of opening up a support case on behalf of yourself. 92% of you got the correct answer, and that it is kind of what Peter's referred to as a general category of network infrastructure automation, and using tools like Consul-Terraform-Sync to achieve that. And a few of you kind of jokers out there believe that infrastructure automation is about unplugging the internet. So I'll have to dock those folks who answered that. As I said earlier, we're going to finish this off before we get into Q&A with seeing a demonstration of the life cycle of network automation. So you heard from Peter that it can go from day zero, where we're just trying to build it, and it's kind of what F5 refers to as the bootstrap process, all the way through handling the day 2+ changes, where from an end user perspective, what you want to see is you're changing your application environment. Maybe you're scaling up or scaling down the number of application resources you have, and you don't want to have the network team being the bottleneck there. So what you'll see in this demonstration is actually part of a shared GitHub repo that we have with HashiCorp, and you can find this repository on the HashiCorp GitHub. There's a link that I will share later. And this is also a environment that we've also made available at F5's user conference as well for our customers to experience network infrastructure automation as well. But what we'll be seeing in this demonstration video is we're going to start from day zero, where we're going to be deploying the infrastructure. You're going to see the use of the F5 application service templates to kind of simplify the configuration of your network. And then we're going to see that as the changes are happening in this demonstration environment, they're happening in near real time. So I will now flip over to the pre-recorded Eric. Hello, in this demo, we're going to be looking at network infrastructure automation with HashiCorp Consul-Terraform-Sync and F5 BigIP's automation toolchain. In this demonstration, we'll look at day zero operations of creating a network and deploying BigIP and Consul services. Next, we'll look at how we can bring in Application Services Extension and the F5 Application Services template to standardize the policies and configurations that we're deploying on our Big IP device. And finally, we'll make use of Consul-Terraform-Sync to seamlessly push changes to the Big IP as changes are occurring in the infrastructure. So let's go into our demo environment. To start, our demo environment is empty of network resources. We will be building the network that we will be deploying. In this case, we are making use of AWS to deploy our network resources, but this could also be done in an on-prem or other network environment as well. We could also make use of an existing network if that is required as well. In this demo environment, you can see that our network has been built, and we have deployed additional resources, including a Big IP and Consul service. Again, if you have an existing environment, we could make use of existing Consul and Big IP resources as well. Once these resources have been deployed, we can take a look at the Consul configuration. We have registered 2 Nginx web servers that we will be using as part of this demonstration. And you can see that the IP information matches what we see in the AWS console. We can also view the configuration of the Big IP device as well. On the Big IP, we can see that we have included the Application Services Extension as well as the F5 Application Service templates to facilitate the configuration and deployment of application services. We will make use of Terraform again to deploy the template that we want to use, as well as the application configuration. You'll observe by using application service templates, we can simplify the input parameters that are required to configure this application service. At this time, the service is still unavailable because we will be next using Consul-Terraform-Sync to push the configuration from Consul to the Big IP device. The configuration of Consul-Terraform-Sync is configured to communicate with both the Consul service as well as the Big IP device. It also makes use of the existing F5 Big IP Terraform provider. Here you can see that the pool members have been updated based upon the data that is available from Consul, and we can now verify that the service is available and communicating with the expected back-end nodes. To simulate a day 2 operation, we will be changing the number of Nginx web servers from 2 to 4. As Consul is updated with the additional nodes, you can see that Consul-Terraform-Sync detects the change and immediately pushes the change to the Big IP device. And finally, we can observe that the 4 additional nodes have been configured and now are available. This concludes our demonstration of network infrastructure automation using HashiCorp's Consul-Terraform-Sync and F5's Big IP automation toolchain. Thank you very much. All right, so hopefully you were able to see through that video. I know it stepped through very quickly, but it kind of reinforces the ideas that you heard from Peter and myself, that if you kind of think about as you're deploying an infrastructure, as you're deploying your applications, you can start from day 0 where you're just trying to get the environment stood up. You've heard about how F5's worked with HashiCorp to kind of provide that day 2 plus changes where we can make use of the tool Consul-Terraform-Sync to kind of enable these near real-time changes and kind of see that in action as well. So at this time, I'd like to invite Karen back to kind of take us into the closing and Q&A.
Before Karen does that, Eric, I wanted to ask you. So you mentioned you scaled up to just 4 additional servers, but could I do more than 4?
Yeah, so some of the scaling testings that we were doing before before Consul-Terraform-Sync went GA is to be able to kind of scale to either hundreds of kind of pool members or hundreds of services. So that's kind of where you can kind of think about taking this use case of, in a demonstration environment, it's not very interesting. We went from 2 to 4, right? It's kind of a bit of a contrived example, but what we really want to think about is, yes, how can you multiply that out? And to your point, when we work with our customers, the scale of your operation might be the number of applications you have or the number of pool members. And in either case, F5 and HashiCorp have worked together to ensure that it can kind of scale to the size of our customers' application workloads.
Awesome.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Eric. There was one question that came in from Joey. Did you want to take that? I think, Peter.
Yeah. Let me dive.
Go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, is namespace is multi-tenant without having to make a namespace, for example, tenant 1 - product tenant 2 - dev, but instead tenant equals customer 1. Namespace equals product, etc. I think you probably understand that better than I do.
All good. And actually, Eric, I might ping you with a follow-up question on this to see if I'm interpreting this right. One thing I want to be careful with is when we're talking about namespaces, we want to make sure that we're not equating this fully just to multi-tenancy. When we think of like true multi-tenancy, I'm talking about a really isolated network segment environment that essentially is no visibility into anything else that's happening across those machines, or maybe certain permissions that I allow. From the console namespace perspective, what we're really aiming to do is provide that kind of logical separation that you might have in a very distributed environment. So think in like a very containerized environment where I have a bunch of different services that I don't need the test version to talk to the production version, but it's still all going to run within the same network. I'm really just trying to have it be in a way that I can do something in test without exposing it to external public traffic. So the piece that I put into the response here is that I really wouldn't want to use namespaces if I'm trying to provide a tenant environment for an external user. It's more for internal management of teams. That basically if Eric has a team that he's leading up and he's in charge of the production environment and I'm part of the development team for the test environment, that we can have both applications running on a network without having to worry about my work kind of interfering with him. But he's still going to have visibility into what is available within my namespace if he has the necessary permissions, and I'm going to have visibility into his. Now, the follow-up question I was going to ask for you, Eric, was I'm not as familiar with tenants on the big IP side, but my guess is that the question here is theoretically, do you think that a customer could define a tenant within your big IP environment, and then we could also layer on top of it some console namespaces? So I wanted to get kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll say in general, when we work with what we refer to tenants, is that people who are familiar with the big IP technology, I think it has a lot of similarities with what you've described with namespaces within. And I believe that was for the enterprise version of Terraform, where you can have these isolated namespaces. And I think the key word that you said was kind of a logical separation of your environment. And I think that's kind of, when we work with our customers about their requirements around separation, it's good for us to kind of understand. In some cases, it is just this logical separation where you might say that this is just kind of, application A, this is application B, but they're very similar type of attributes. In other cases, to your point, we could be talking about people who want to separate the production from the development environment, and that might kind of carry a different type of requirements. So in general, I'll say that it's similar where we would want to understand kind of what your requirements are around isolation, and in some cases, yes, you can absolutely achieve that through kind of a logical separation in the device to kind of meet your requirement. In other cases, we might have some other recommendations, but in general, I'll say that both, F5 and HashiCorp, I think this is kind of very true of any large enterprise environment. You're going to have many different teams that need to work together, and we've definitely engineered our solutions to kind of work across those different boundaries or provide separation of them.
Thanks, Eric. So we have a few other questions that have come in. Can you use network infrastructure automation with existing network configurations or only with new configurations? Who would like to take that one?
I can take that. Yeah, I think there seems to be maybe just the way the demo is a misconception that if you're dealing with Terraform or Consul or using AOS3, that this only works with kind of like greenfield is kind of the term that I usually hear. But I do want to emphasize that some of the greatest value, and I think, Peter, you kind of talked about this, is kind of looking for the value within the automation, is being able to apply these processes to kind of existing infrastructure and being able to look for the pain points of where you need to improve the process. And absolutely, we can apply these same kind of Terraform and Consul's tool to kind of adapt to existing infrastructures. And oftentimes we can reuse existing configuration, and sometimes we may kind of recommend kind of retrofitting or redefining some resources. But F5 and our customers have definitely seen a lot of success stories where you can take like the 5-day, 5 months process and then be able to kind of bring it down to kind of hours or minutes by looking at what's the biggest bottleneck within that, and then applying automation tools to be able to kind of help expedite that.
Yeah, I think just to tag onto that really quickly, Eric, I think you showed a really good example in your demo of having those templates available to be able to layer into an existing environment, right? Like if you have certain logic and certain policies kind of predefined, we're not looking for you to tear everything down, rebuild it, and then rewrite everything. What we want you to do is layer this in as a way to say, okay, I've configured things in the manner that I want to have them, and there's going to be some additional writing and code that I have to incorporate as far as like creating the task definitions or creating the templates in order for it to work properly. But the idea is not that we're trying to get you to do this from a brand new scratch environment. We want you to be able to try and weave this in at the pace that makes the most sense for you. Maybe you start off with a different custom policy just to make sure it works, but then you incorporate it with the existing ones. So you absolutely can. I don't think it's a type of thing where it's like, all right, if you already started, you're too late.
Thanks, Peter. One more question. Do you have examples of using Consul-Terraform-Sync with multiple different network providers?
Yeah, so I can take one crack at this, and then I'd be curious to get your perspective on it, Eric. We actually so we've done a number. One of the things that's really cool about Consul-Terraform-Sync is if you remember the task driver block that I was saying, we can download actually multiple different providers at the same time. So if I'm trying to weave in multiple solutions, all I'm going to do is, as part of that initial driver install, I'm going to make sure that I have the required providers available. Now, the second piece of that is going to be the module component. Fortunately, we've had a great partnership with the F5 folks who've pre-written modules for you. The nice thing is that Consul-Terraform-Sync supports basically any Terraform module that you write. So you have the capability of writing custom logic yourself. If you've ever written a Terraform module before, or if you need guidance, you can go to our docs. We do have kind of outlines of like how you write a Consul-Terraform-Sync module. You could then publish it to our registry if you want others to be able to use it. Or just use it internally. But essentially, it's kind of the two parts is that this is going to work just like how Terraform works, in the sense that if I am downloading multiple providers or I'm provisioning multiple resources, I can definitely do that. And essentially, as long as it's defined and Terraform's aware of it, then I should be good to go. But yeah, Eric, curious to hear your experiences with that too.
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking, I was kind of thinking about that question. Yeah, so the demo itself obviously is kind of using, for the Consul-Terraform-Sync portion of it, just kind of the big IP provider. But Peter, what you described makes absolute sense, is that I was also making use of the AWS provider within that case as well. So, I mean, I can't think of a useful example, but say, for example, I wanted to create like an S3 bucket item with each node, conceptually, there's nothing that would prevent me from doing that. Or maybe it's about integrating with a different IPAM provider. I don't know, but that would be kind of an interesting use case to kind of look at. Because I think that's kind of one of the things that's nice about this solution is that the reality is that when you're making changes within your infrastructure, it's not just one team or one device that needs to be updating, but it's being able to kind of orchestrate these across different environments. And I think that what you're kind of hearing from F5 and HashiCorp is how we can kind of like loosely couple together these services, so that if you do want to kind of bring these all together to kind of assemble your final solution, we've definitely worked hard to make sure that it's easy for you to bring multiple providers together, regardless of the vendor.
Yeah, just one thing to add on to that too, because I think you brought up a really good point, is we're trying to allow you to be able to set the pathways to be able to automate your infrastructure however you see fit. One of the really powerful things is not so much that I'm going to do this and that I'm going to be responsible for executing the changes. What's going to happen is that I'm going to predefine it so that when my end users and the people who previously were coming to me and submitting a help desk ticket, they're going to be able to hit like an API where we say, deploy your application in this manner. And then once I see that change happen, that my system's going to take care of itself. And that's what's really like the powerful story, is that I'm not saying it's one and done, right? I'm not doing this once. There's going to be changes I make. There's configurations I can do, but I can focus on those as opposed to executing the end user needs. And so like in previous examples that I've heard from customers is they said, look, we have a lot to do just to improve like the overall infrastructure and their overall networking kind of like posture and what we're trying to do. If I have my team that's constantly fielding these tickets for something that's like an ingress or egress point into the network, like if I'm just opening ports, that's not super helpful for me to be able to make improvements to other areas. So what I can do instead is say, hey, Mr. Developer, when you need that ingress or egress point, hit this API. It's going to trigger this whole workflow for me, and it's going to take care of it. And that's what we mean when we're saying like automation. It's not so much like, okay, I'm going to be sitting in here and, to Eric's demo's point, like I'm not going to be one scaling those applications up and down. I'm going to enable that for my end users and just make sure they're doing it in a compliant manner.
Thanks, Peter. We have one final question. So does this require any additional software license to use this from HashiCorp or F5?
Nope. No. So this is available as Consul-Terraform-Sync is an open source tool that's available. The one thing I'll say is that you do need to install Consul into the environment as well as Consul-Terraform-Sync. There is a configuration process, and if you go to learn.hashicorp.com, we have guides that can actually walk you through the process of how to install Consul-Terraform-Sync into a specific environment and give you some kind of like makeshift variables to get started. But like I was showing on those driver definitions and those task definitions, you will need to create those configuration files. Installing Consul is not going to automatically enable this tool. So, yeah.
Thanks, Peter. And Eric, we do have a number of resource links. I don't know whether you want to.
Yeah, I'll kind of talk about that with respect to this question too. So the first resource link, and I don't know how this is going to render, but this will be shared with the attendees, or if you catch up with the recording later. But the first is the F5 automation toolchain. So to that earlier question, the application services extension, the application service template is part of our automation toolchain. The automation toolchain is open source, freely available. So it's an add-on to the Big IP software. So if you have a Big IP device and you'd like to take advantage of automation, that's the first part of it. And then the second part of it, resource that was changed is the GitHub repo. So if there are kind of coders who want to kind of kick the tires on the solution, it kind of walks through how you can, the demo environment, which does, it deploys a console server, it deploys a Big IP device, and then it also kind of walks you through how to use Consul-Terraform-Sync. So if you're just trying to kind of understand these concepts, it could be a good place to start.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, and thank you to our audience. Those are some great questions. So we're coming to the end of the webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar and has a better understanding of dynamic service networking with F5 and HashiCorp. And finally, as mentioned at the beginning, the webinar was recorded and we will make the recording available after processing. I'll send an email to everyone who registered with the recording link. Have a great day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you all.